abandoning modernity, embracing tradition. A Buddhist example. There is an abundance of discourse on European and Eastern traditions, promoting a return to tradition as a solution to the overall failure, collapse, and delusion of modernity. Modernity, a globalizing world that has defined itself in the opposition to local traditions, against the ethos of religious devotion, and against many other elements, such as the acknowledgement of the inevitability of war, which once supported the preparation for it, and, above all, to a higher, sacred reality that serves as a source of power, motivation, and fulfillment. In this video, we want to offer a practical perspective, making it easier to return to tradition and stay there. Much can be read about tradition and around it. One can admire various aspects of it, but it is far more difficult to immerse oneself in it and to experience the world through its lens. And that is precisely what we seek, not to fabricate reconstructions, not to adapt elements of tradition as mere accessories or a lifestyle, but to unlearn modern thinking, abandon its modus operandi, forsake its views on human, nature, and bizarre sense of identity, and to adopt traditional analogues instead. In 21st century, this path is not paved with ready receipts, and we know many failed enterprises to embody the tradition, where fail is essentially inventing the tradition inside the modern cosmos. Of course, such a transfiguration comes at a price. It demands commitment. In fact, the very word commitment is one of the central pillars of the traditional ethos. From our perspective, we assume a fundamental antagonism between modernity and tradition, of following thinkers such as René Guénon and Julius Evola. Both sides, tradition and modernity, have articulated this antagonism in various ways. It is embedded in both common thinking and many encyclopedic definitions. This antagonism leads us to the conclusion that the entire ethos of the modern individual stands in opposition to tradition by mere definition, or at the very least, aspires to be its antithesis. We encounter such thinking in the colloquial language and in journalism. There are various traditions characterized by both similarities and differences, and there is modernity, which fundamentally differs from all traditions. Before modernity secured its place on the podium, the world was simply filled with different cultures, marked by internal coherence and continuity of transmission. These cultures were, quite simply, traditions. At the same time, if current modern project has failed, then so too has the entire set of values, meanings, and life goals that have been instilled in us over the past decades, under what is often called the Boomer Truth regime. We assume this to be the case, that phenomena such as the mental health crisis and the accompanying epidemic of various substances, from psychotropics to recreational drugs, what John Vervaeke calls the meaning crisis, the breakdown of social bonds, and most importantly, the demographic crisis, all signal the failure and impending collapse of modernity. Many times modernity has attempted to transform itself into something else without negating its foundational paradigm. Hence, postmodernism and metamodernism, which are, in truth, nothing but late modernity. Thus, we propose abandoning the sinking ship. Modern exit. Returning to tradition through practice. I will use the example of Buddhist tradition, but we believe it is applicable to others as well. As Hegel once wrote, and Bruno Latour later echoed, The modern man's prayer begins with reading the morning newspaper. For the 21st century individual, this has become the act of unlocking a screen and scrolling. At that moment, the mind is harnessed into a current. It begins to participate, and thus it inhabits a particular world. When I lived in Nepal, I had the opportunity to spend several days in the home of a Buddhist monk from the Nyingma tradition, as a torrential downpour prevented me from pitching my tent. Early in the morning, I was awakened by the sounds of mantras. Not only was the monk chanting, but so was the sculptor from Bhutan who had come to create a new statue for the monastery. The previous one had been stolen. Each of these gentlemen quietly, but audibly, repeated their own mantra. Similarly, while trekking in the Himalayas, in the lodge in Langtang, I encountered an elderly woman, over 85 years old, sitting by the stove, reciting Om Mani Padme Hum. These experiences helped me understand something fundamental. The concept of tradition is, first and foremost, about wholeness, a complete culture, a complete system of communication, a complete way of experiencing the world. It is about wholesomeness from top to bottom. And as Latour observed and wrote in We Have Never Been Modern, hybridization itself is a sign of modernity. We can understand it closely to the Frankenstein archetype. We are taking different parts which used to exist apart of each other and mix it, thus creating a chimera. One of the tricky, secretly chimerical dilemmas of returning to tradition lies in the dimension of time. Tradition appears as something that existed in the past, so if we operate within a linear understanding of time, we should theoretically go back into the past. People attempt to realize this idea through clothing, for example, leading to historical reenactments. In reality, however, the linear conception of time and its historicism are fundamentally modern constructs. Therefore, we do not need to go back to Monkey, that is, to attempt some kind of spatiotemporal regression, which in essence is impossible, not because we cannot, technically speaking, go back to the past, but because, from traditional perspective, linear time is just a false view. Thus, attempting to create any hybrids between these two antagonistic ways of life is, by definition, a modern endeavor. This is a crucial point. This is the reality and the challenge of the 21st century as it presents itself to us. Therefore, to truly engage in an experiment of living within tradition, we must systematically and translate every element of our lives into the language and perspective of tradition, calmly, step by step, diligently, and without skipping anything. The dichotomy I emphasize may seem extreme, but in practice, it proves to be a highly useful distinction. To initiate the process of abandoning modernity, which, even in its late, post, or meta variant, still surrounds us, we must redirect the mind onto a different track, alter its current, and eventually draw from this an entirely different style of action. The foundation of every tradition is worship. The highest cultural act, both personal and communal, is worship, offering reverence, praise, and glory to the highest, the sacred, the divine. Worship and respect connect us to the highest, establishing a relationship with it, and this is precisely the purpose of mantras, as well as, for instance, the Jesus prayer. In traditional logic, there are two fundamental rules of participation: worshipping and the ability to worship. The latter includes a set of conditions that enable contact with the sacred. The preparation for these conditions can generally be described as purification. Worship and purification are therefore co-emergent. This means that by worshipping, we purify ourselves, and by purifying ourselves, we reach worship. Who do we worship? Chanting a mantra such as the 7-line invocation of Padmasambhava is an act of calling upon, addressing, and petitioning for blessings from the patron figure. Imagine a mantra as grains of sand trickling through a vast hourglass. Each grain is both a unit of time and a unit of commitment, filling the mind and the body. In tantric practice, mantra chanting is accompanied by visualization. One sees the sacred figure before them. It is crucial to note that visualization is mantra, inseparable from it. Sound, meaning, and image together form an interdimensional mantra. Through this practice, using an imagination diversified by various senses, we saturate our experience with that living presence of the sacred deity or saint. Buddhist sutras repeatedly state that simply thinking of one of the victorious ones, the Buddhas, brings us closer to their presence. We think that in the traditional cosmos, thinking is not a sterile cognitive act, but always an act of invoking. Through the worship, we belong. Thus, we connect to traditional cosmos through its saints, masters, and deities, binding ourselves to them in every moment, integrating ourselves with the sacred reality. We aspire to live with the saints and deities, wake up from the delusion of individualistic existence, and embrace individualistic dwelling. Think, know, sense, and operate within the great mandala of enlightened beings. This said, the truth about reality, reflected in the Indra's net, bonds us all together, and we proclaim it through the worship. Rather than resorting to any of the dozens of biohacks, technological gadgets, or therapeutic culture tricks invented by modernity, we use mantras. In the Vajrayana tradition, we use mantras for everything. Thus, we shift to an entirely different modus operandi, much like Christians who, rather than forcing personal preconceived agenda, surrender their desires in prayer, offer supplications to God or invoke the saints, thereby relinquishing control to the divine. During a worship, bowing before the deity is putting oneself into his hands. We become capable of this fundamentally magical act thanks to purifications. In Vajrayana, we can bond any of our actions with the saint through the mantra. Mantras can be used for supplication, intertwining our thoughts, memories, plans, and desires with the sacred reality. This represents a fundamentally different mode of operation from attempting to achieve something purely through one's own agency. If we want something, we entrust it to the victors and masters. I desire this, but let your will determine how I receive it. Through this, we engage with the unknown, the hidden, the contingent dimensional reality, rather than ignoring it. I cannot stress enough that this cognitive operation is essentially different from the default, modern way of operating, where we project and impose our thoughts on the physical reality. My teacher once said that everything, from a cup of tea to a meal to a breathtaking landscape, can be offered to the victors. This act of offering, done sincerely, with feeling, calmness, and devotion, is itself an act of conversion, rewriting our lives into the traditional framework. We aim to do it all the time, bonding everything with the divine. If you imagine your life as an immense net of persons and energies, embracing anything, your past and future, ancestors and dreams of the future, we want now to suffuse all this in the divine. This is a first step to transfigure one's experience, day by day, hour by hour, patiently, but with vigor. In future videos, we will discuss other ways of converting experience and action into the traditional cosmos. Our idea is generally not about annihilating any crucial aspects of our reality: sports, mediated communication, tech, for particular. Rather, we want to propose how elements taken as foundational for modernity can be immersed in the tradition, its usage transformed and expanded. It can bring us to conclusion that tradition can teach us to use many things just better, especially technologies. So please stay with us, subscribe, and ask for anything you would like us to talk about regarding the traditional ethos.